Trolling for a gig with Brain Drone? Can't blame you. It's a drone you control with your brain, which controls your thumbs, which control this joystick.
No, I'm actually over at the GE booth. We're creating the operating system for industry. It's called Predix. It's going to change the way the world works.
Okay, I'm telling my brain to tell the drone to get you a copy of my resume.
Maybe keep your hands on the controller. Oh.
You know what? I'm just gonna email it to you.
Yeah, that's probably safer.
Oh, cool.
Thank you so much, Bill.
It's great to be here, Vijay.
So, as you've probably already figured out, I love GE. So let me reveal my... Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Me too.
That's good. So let's just get started. I hope you managed to, the audio was a little bit off on that commercial, at least on the stage. I hope you guys could hear it, but it's just sort of really speaks to the last point that I left you on, which has to do with talent. But let's get started with, let's just get a sense of what GE does, because everybody knows that it's a big industrial company, but it's useful just sort of level setting and understanding what the company does.
Yeah, so I'm fortunate. I have a front row seat to the largest, arguably the largest transformation of GE in its history. It's a 124-year-old company founded by Thomas Edison, J.P. Morgan, so luminaries. When you look at what's happening, we actually, I think something like 60% of our revenue has been transformed, meaning has been pushed out of the company. Imagine you said, I'm going to sell 60% of my company and transform it. That's essentially what we have done in the last few years in this transformation. So NBC, Universal, the entertainment group is out. GE Capital was probably the big one. We've moved away from trying to be a capital bank, selling the appliances division, the consumer, and everything is focused on industrial. We're actually going back to our roots, and so we have we're the largest in jet aircraft engines and aviation products. GE generates now about 40% of the world's electricity on our products. So if it generates electricity, we make it, and everything that surrounds that and the power. Healthcare takes an image of the body, and life sciences, these are a big part. Most people don't know, we have a rail and mining business, big locomotive operations. And oil and gas was really come along in the last decade. So everything is centered around aviation. And then we've added in what we're going to talk a little bit more about, this digital business. And so it's completely transformed itself over the last few years, focused on industrial.
So you call I mean, the scope of this, just that transformation, without even talking about digital, is pretty darn impressive, right? I mean, shedding some divisions, adding new investments, that's pretty, that in itself would, I think, have threatened a lot of companies. But so you call yourself the digital industrial company, and I think everybody has seen your commercials now, and everybody loves the commercials. But what is that? What is the idea behind merging those two words, digital industrial?
Well, it's your presentation, right? That's us.
Well, thank you.
I think I joined 5 years ago. It wasn't like I woke up as a computer scientist and thought, gee, I'm going to join, a digital. I am Owen, right? I didn't say, oh, I'm going to go work for a big iron company. But 5 years ago, I was recruited by Jeff and the other executives into that they saw that this analytics, data, software thing was going to transform their services. And I'd say it started with services. There was a recognition that, and our services business is actually a key driver for the company. So we sell the product, but when you sell a jet aircraft engine, you sell a 20-year service agreement to maintain it and give the customer time on wing and a certain amount of performance guarantees. And there was a recognition that data and analytics was going to be the center point of your services business. So they didn't quite understand what that meant. And they said, okay, but they knew if they didn't get ahead of it, somebody else would.
Right.
And that's, by the way, what a 124-year-old company is they're always trying to figure out where they're going to get disrupted. This didn't happen now. This has been going on 124 years of you are constantly disrupting yourself. And so they said, we don't know exactly what it is, so let's go figure it out. I was brought in, And when I was brought in, it was one of those moments where you're not really, you do something you just can't believe you did. And that was, Jeff said, look, we don't understand. I'd say that, he didn't say it quite like this, but this is what he meant. We don't even know quite what your role is going to be. But we want you to figure it out and go along with it with me. And so, I was crazy enough to say yes. And he said, but we'll put $1 billion over 3 years into it. So by the way, this is not capital free. Anybody who thinks it doesn't take a lot of money to do this you'll find yourself, you have to invest. It's not free. So he put the investment in, but what we discovered as we went along and the strategy we came out with is that the future of our products is going to be about who can deliver the most efficiency about an asset. And I think this is really important. Our analysis, and coming back to your examples, we looked at a lot of companies, but 3 that you talked about, Apple, Uber, and Airbnb. These are companies that, the press doesn't really put it this way, but these are 3 companies that own no assets but make a ton of money on it. So you might say, well, Apple owns assets. Well, as a software business, that's not true. They sell everybody else's assets and make 20 billion plus a year on somebody else's asset. They have 12 assets on the 12 applications. They give those away for free, but they make money on everybody else's asset. Uber, everybody else's asset. Airbnb, everybody else's asset. So you might say, well, what is it they have? Well, they have an outstanding, efficient user experience with an outstanding, efficient business model that takes an asset and delivers more value out of an asset. So now think about that. We used to value companies that have assets. We now value companies that get more efficiency out of assets. And I think if you're an asset company, you better be afraid, because it means that somebody with software and a great strategy can go into your asset and deliver more value, and the customer is going to move to whoever gives greatest efficiency around the asset. That gets coupled with one other fact that you mentioned. We are in a slow growth world, and every meeting we have, Jeff says to us, get used to it and figure out how to compete in a slow growth world. And it is so powerful to understand that it actually frees you up to say, okay, I'm not going to think GDP is the way I'm going to grow. The market's going to return.
Right.
It's not. So you better get used to it. The thing you get coupled with that, if that's true, and in the industrial world, 20 years, 1990 to 2010, industrial productivity, which is top line, bottom line growth, was 4% a year on average globally. You know what's been since 2010? 1% a year, which means you are barely keeping status quo. That's the average, which means some people are below average. What that says is there is no more efficiency that you hope for GDP growth. There's no more, gee, I'm going to get more out of, by hiring people at a lower rate. It's going to be about where are you going to get efficiency. That's where software's eating the world. So you couple that together, and that's when we said, look, digital transformation is you're going to have to get good at this for services, and you're going to have to be able to do this because if you don't, somebody else will. And it's not about who owns the asset, it's who delivers the most efficient experience around the asset.
Right. And so Pratt & Whitney, for example, is partnering with IBM because I suspect they don't have the scale that a GE does to do it themselves. But you're right, so there is competition. But walk us through your journey, because I know you got hired to run, I think you got hired to run the Software Center of Excellence, and now that's been launched into this full-blown division, GE Digital, which is already a multi-billion-dollar unit.
Yeah.
So walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, the Software Center was actually this idea of that they said, well, I have to give you something that sounds like a real job. I was me and my assistant. That was it, literally on day one. And then I had some people in a research group. But this was part of let's figure it out. And as we went along the journey, we finally got to the point where we got full agreement last summer on the strategy, and we laid that out for the market. And by the way, we had knockdown, drag-out fights over this strategy. But when we finally got comfortable with the strategy, we announced the creation of GE Digital. Jeff describes it as a company within a company. And so if you imagine GE as a series of business units, think of digital as an L shape, which is you're a separate business, but you're also cutting across them all. And here was the realization that it's the innovator's dilemma. Clayton Christensen said, you get so good at what you do that it's hard to do something different. Right. And our folks are brilliant, but the idea of digital DNA is not in there. So you can pull it out, but then there's no scale. There's no efficiency to that. In fact, all you've done is created a startup with a bureaucracy. That's a recipe for disaster. So then they said, okay, if you leave it in, well, there's no digital DNA. So they said, well, we're going to do something, it's a typical GE way. We're going to do a new leadership model, and we're going to get it right. And it was, okay, we're going to put a chief digital officer in every business. And I spent the last 6 months hiring those and consolidating. And that person is going to report directly to me and directly to the CEO of the business. And I remember we had a lot of interesting discussions, and Jeff finally just said, look, get over it and do it. And he said, this is the only way you're going to get scale coupled with digital DNA, and I just expect you to get it right. And I have to say, in the beginning, you're like, okay, nobody's done it this way, but we'll do it this way. But the fact is, it's worked exactly as we thought. And the one thing about GE leadership, once you make a decision, you go. Right. And that's really an important part. So that's been a key, is we have this, I'd say, L-shaped structure for GE Digital.
But it's a fascinating story that you actually have it's easy to say as words, awfully hard to put into practice, where you have a chief digital officer in every unit.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I read as I was preparing for this was you just announced a digital aircraft engine business. So I just read that.
Yes.
So tell us about, so we're now beginning to see the manifestations from a revenue perspective of the model that Bill is talking about. So why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah, our strategy really has 3 components. The first is simply, we're going to make our machines smarter. So we've committed that we're going to get smart about making machines smarter, more data coming off it. That's about taking the old and making it new. That's the water meter example. That's an easy one. Everybody can do that. Everybody will do that. The second part of it is the harder part. Then you say, I'm going to be in the application space. And this is where we had to decide that we have this matrix organization where we have every business will create think of it as the next-gen ERP to run your business. It's not to do the accounting and all of that stuff. It's really to take a rail yard and manage rail yard better. And the jet aircraft it's all about applications around the engine and other things. So fuel efficiency. Our big killer application is predictive maintenance. I would say in 10 years, we will figure out when a part will break every time before it breaks, and we will fix it every time before it breaks. What that means is that you'll get rid of unplanned delays for mechanical unplanned delays. I think those will go away in let's say, the next 10 years. That's about 41% of all delays in aircraft. The other's weather and air traffic control, and I think we'll fix the weather before we fix air traffic control. But I think the reality is, if you can get rid of 40% of those delays, I think we'd all be kind of happy. Yeah. That's what we're really doing in each of those businesses.
Yeah, with the current state of Congress, I don't think we're fixing air traffic control anytime soon. So that's fascinating, because so what I think Bill is talking about is like a new operating model for every single industry that they're in.
Yeah.
And GE certainly hopes to be sort of the one. It's like the operating system model. If you control the operating system, you win. And I think that's just really a powerful strategy.
But I just want to mention the third part of our strategy, and this was, again, a big knockdown, drag-out fight, is not only did we get into the app, as the third part of that stool is we decided to build an industrial operating system, or an industrial platform on which you build these kinds of capabilities. And the question whether we should do it or somebody else would do it was a long conversation, but we felt we were early enough we could win that. So, it's making your machines smarter. The application business, I think every industrial company will do those too. The platform, there's only going to be a few, and we were early enough, and that's where we have enough leverage and funding to be able to get there.
So this is Predix you're talking about?
This is Predix.
So talk to us about Predix.
So when I got there, we realized that we had a lot of applications being built. We had about a $2.5 billion business, but they were all built on a different stack with a different technology, and everybody made a different choice. This is typical big company, especially big companies who are not software-oriented, right? And by the way, you see this in places like Google, where Chrome and Android and all of their tool set don't exactly all work together out of the box the same way. I think that, though, if you're going to get scale and leverage, we realized you had to have a common platform. So we did it for ourselves. What we realized when we did it is there wasn't a lot out there for the industrial world. There was a lot out there for the consumer world and the enterprise world, but the industrial world's different because you have to do more real-time processing, and most of the technology was not applicable to the way you had to operate a power plant or a jet aircraft engine. So our platform was, we do it for ourselves, but then we figured out there was a market for it, took it out, and it went GA in February, and it's been a big success for us. So we think that that's really about then changing. You want to talk about foundationally changing the company. Predix is our Uber thing that takes us and say, we're willing to make a really big bet that's really uncomfortable.
So, yeah, because that's selling a completely different service from anything you've ever sold before.
Absolutely.
So who buys it, and how do they use Predix?
So it's easy, to sell it to our existing customers. A great example is Exelon, the energy company. There isn't a company out there now that says, look, I've got to figure out, how to automate and take my domain knowledge, my data, put it together, and get more efficiency out of my system, right? So Exelon, we've partnered with Exelon, for example, and they are building their infrastructure entirely around this. Now, this doesn't replace your traditional IT enterprise systems. It really suggests that there are going to be two architectures in every industrial business. A mode 1, Gartner calls it mode 1, and that's your traditional ERP, and a mode 2, which is this idea of an efficiency analytic-based platform for industrial. The second one is we sell to non-traditionals. So Pitney Bowes makes mailing machines. We've never worked with them before. They have built their entire process for their applications and their mailing machines around this as well. They've gone to market with it. So it's for traditional, and the thing that gets me excited is the non-traditional industrial companies that we're working with.
So you've identified a huge sort of gaping hole in the marketplace where companies have probably wanted this or may not have even known they wanted it, sort of like Steve Jobs would say, let me tell you what you need and I'll supply it for you. But I think when they see a viable platform, it makes them think about how they might use it.
I think 2 years ago, our customers would say, now tell me again why you're doing it, we ran 300 customers in last year. And I think it's, by the way, I love when you give this presentation because the fact is that 3 years ago, companies were like, I don't get it, to, I will tell you right now, everybody gets it. And they're beginning, now they don't know what to do, and so timing was perfect. But you've got to be willing to take a bet and a risk, and I think that that's the challenge for a big company is they're very uncomfortable taking as big a risk early on.
Yeah, sometimes I think they forget that making the investment is also taking a risk.
It's always taking the risk, that's right.
So I guess that is what you mean by becoming a software company to some degree. So analytics driving all your own machines, but also a whole new line of business for you. But Jeff has said he wants G to be a top 10 software business. So what does that mean in terms of your sort of objectives?
So I think that the one thing about GE, Jeff in particular, is he pushes hard and he sets a huge objective. I think that companies have to do that. They almost have to say we're going to do something big, and then put the pressure on to do it. And so that gives us a very specific goal. The goal then comes down to this: that we were a $2.5 billion, say, legacy software business in 2011. We've grown that to a $5 billion business, digital business, in 2015. What he's saying is we're going to grow that, and we've declared this to the market, to a $15 billion business by 2020. So we doubled it in essentially 4 years, and we want to triple it in 5 years. But the other side of it is, if I go in and say, hey, Jeff, this is pretty hard to do, because essentially that doesn't work with him. I'll just be really honest. And then he goes, but Bill, you told me the market opportunity was $225 billion by 2020, which we did. It's actually, we view it bigger than, quote, the enterprise cloud software business, let's say. With the consumers, a little harder to figure out. But if it is, then he says, well, maybe I should increase your number. And I think, look, the reality of this is nobody knows. But the fact is it's going to be big. And in this, you know, when we started this, I told you, he gave me $1 billion for 3 years across the company. This year, he said, I'm giving you $1 billion this year. Look, this is not an inexpensive, platforms are not inexpensive, but I think that gives you a feel that I think every company is going to have to say what it needs to be. It's going to have to be a software business.
Right.
I think you're right on that. It doesn't mean we want to be Microsoft. We want to be digital industrial, but we have a very specific goal, which is we are going to make money at this. This is not a startup where they can lose money forever. This is the one thing about an industrial company is they've got to have returns. So for us, it's about how do you get the returns, how do you leverage our scale, and I think the final thing, and you think you can think about is, look, what a big company has is scale. The problem they have is unleashing scale.
Right.
And what Jeff has said is, look, I'm showing you how to unleash scale. You figure out how to take advantage of it.
But I want to sort of underscore something that you said because I want everybody to recognize $225 billion market opportunity. And let's say it's very hard to forecast this. So it could be plus or minus 20%, more likely plus, I would suspect.
Yeah.
I mean, that speaks to all of us who are in the lines of business that Bill is trying to serve. Because if you are not acting on that whether you use a GE service or not, if you are not acting on that $225 billion software opportunity, you are going to fall behind. And I think that's the point that I do want to drive home because it really speaks to kind of how quickly we need to move to exploit things like this. But you know, the other thing that you're doing with the platform that I found really interesting was you're building an ecosystem for it. You're opening it up, and you have this new alliance program. And everybody's sort of, we all have smartphones, and everybody understands the Apple ecosystem and the Android ecosystem. It's got to be very different in the industrial world.
Yeah. The industrial companies, actually, this gets down to they don't have any digital DNA. Now, I separate out that you can have, I heard from, I was at a meeting with a famous guy in the Bay Area, and he said, there's a difference in hiring programmers and coders. And I think it's a very impactful statement. We have a lot of programmers, mode 1. They don't get you to mode 2, which is coders, right? So you start to realize that you have to have digital DNA to know somewhat the difference. And that's a longer story. But the thing I'd say, come back to ecosystems, you got to have talent, and you got to know what the right kind of talent is. You've got to understand speed versus Six Sigma and things like that. And then you've got to be able to deal with ecosystems. And I'd say the ecosystems is most big companies think they can do everything themselves. They don't understand how to unleash an ecosystem. They're afraid of giving up control in the wrong way. And I think that, it took me a while to get everyone to realize that partnering and ecosystems are important. So you just have to be willing to create that. Now, the interesting thing about Pitney Bowes is they're not only a customer on Predix, but they're building software that we're helping them distribute. We created incubators around the world. I have an incubator in Israel. We created 15 companies. We don't invest in them. They just came onto Predix, and they will create microservices on Predix that we are going to sell, and some of them are on. We see that 50% of those microservices won't be ours. They'll be somebody else's, and it could be much more than that. And that, in the end, that's the value we have, is we are a network. We operate already in just about every country globally, right? So we have plans on how we're going to get to Cuba. So what we have is reach for the ecosystem. That's what they want. What I need is I can't develop everything. I don't want to develop everything. So that idea of an ecosystem was one that was hard to get to, was foundational, and now we're finding ourselves working in new ways. But then, again, you've got to invest in a whole team to enable ecosystems. It doesn't happen for free.
So I just want to give the mic runners a heads up that after this question, I will be turning over to the audience. But what are the rules of engagement with these ecosystems? So how do you select a partner? What are you looking for in these partners?
Yeah. So it's not as scientific as the question may sound. Look, I think in the beginning you're working with a lot of your friends, but it's people who share the same, let's say, value system, that they realize they're very industrial focused. We're not trying to manage a thermostat or your appliance. We might have in the past, but we're out of the appliance business, okay? It may say GE on it, but that we've sold out. So we don't want to our focus is everything for us. So focus is on industrial. We want people who want to make, manufacturing better, who want to make, power plants better, and so on. So for us, it's first, who shares that industrial vision? Secondly, you got to share a technology vision. Our technology vision is based on a lot of open source, cloud foundry. You have to embrace that style of development, because if you don't, it's not going to work on what we do. And as people who embrace the cloud mobile phenomenon, the Mode 2 phenomenon, and say, that's the way I want to build my capability. And then I think the last thing is it's people where we can figure out what we bring together. So meaning they are building something that, we'll say, okay, we won't do that. Mm-hmm. And the second side is what we're bringing them is they realize that they can't get into a market like they may not be in the Middle East or they may not be in Greater Asia, and we can go in there and help them. So you have to have that where the sum actually adds up to more, and you're willing to act upon it. So those are the three things that we found is we're working with.
And this is where the role of sort of Jeff's becomes crucial, because you have to drive transformation from the top.
Yeah.
Questions for Bill? If you could raise your hands, and we will get a mic run over to you, and we'll point out to you. So we'll alternate sides. So the gentleman over there, and then the gentleman over here. I think it is. Just go. We can hear you.
Okay, sorry. My company is in the business of doing these types of implementations for clients, and one of the things that absolutely blows me away is with these net new Gartner Mode 2 type of implementations, they don't have any metrics defined for what is success. They just know they have to do that. And I was wondering if you could offer any insight for two reasons. One is just in general, how do we know we did the right thing? But two, from my company's standpoint, is how do we help them show additional value with what we do? Because if we get to this point, they say, bye, see you later, go on to the next thing.
So I think that our lesson learned, and one of the things that when I meet executives in these companies or boards that come in, I think that the thing we discovered over a lot of mistakes we had is that the technology is secondary, it's outcomes. So we always focus on patterns of outcomes. I'll tell you right now, the low-hanging fruit is service transformation. Every company is struggling with how do they grow services around their product line or how they become more efficient. So we have a company who sells elevators. We've made them more efficient. We have a company that sells bath and kitchen products out of Japan. It turns out they have services for those products in hotels. The cost of making 2 sales trips or service trips versus 1 is huge. You know this. And I think that the idea of focusing on a few of these outcome-based patterns is what most of these, quote, IoT vendors haven't done, is they come in and say, connect your machines, use your data, build some analytics. That's maybe what you do, but it's not, there's zero value to that process. You got to start with identifying 1 or 2 areas where that data and analytics will lead to an outcome. And so, we've identified 6 areas, things like resource efficiency or people scheduling or and so on. So I think that for companies like yourself, the winners are going to help those companies go very fast at identifying an outcome, and then you go connect the machines and blah, 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 blah. And I think this idea of outcomes, it's no longer solutions, it's no longer feature function. You start with an outcome and you go down. Now the second thing is anybody can build one outcome. The question is then can you enable the building of the next and the next and the next? So in our company, we have built, I would bet you, 700 or 800 outcome-based services at this point within our company. And last year we saved $300 million internally on this. And now Jeff gives me a reward. It's $500 million this year. So it's the reality is that there is so much low-hanging fruit in this efficiency thing that you can cut, resource scheduling, et cetera. The person who can unlock and help a company figure that out and then has a way to help them with the platform to move forward is the win. That's our simple model that is working very, very well. And by the way, we have implementation. We are not building a service organization. I don't do implementation. I'm not a consulting firm, and nor do we have any desire to be one. So for us, these are the kinds of things that we have. And we're working with, I know some of the companies, Accenture out there is a great partner and so on. So,
Let me give you my card.
Yeah.
The gentleman over there.
Yes, Mr. Manager, what are your expectations for your digital transformation officers?
For my digital transformation officers?
CDOs.
Yeah, my
Direct report.
CDOs. Portfolio. The hardest thing to get right, so if I'm an industrial company, the hardest thing to get right is the portfolio. The thing that we've learned,
Hey,
and you're just going to have to end up going through this, is there's 5,000 really great ideas in the company as to how to go do this and what it looks like.
Yeah.
And there's only, and 90% of them stink. The problem is figuring out what the good 10% are inside of it. And I think that you need a CDO process, or a process for that leader to really be able to quickly figure out which ones of these kinds of services are going to win in the market and most effectively. And then you got to figure out what you give away for free versus what you sell. Because it turns out that your customers actually are just going to expect some of this for free. And so sometimes you think you're going to sell it, and you are, I always tell guys, you're smoking dope if you're going to make money on that, because you have to sort of decide what you do just in general make your product better. And I think the portfolio process is the piece that, and great portfolio managers are the hardest thing to find. And I think if again, in the Valley, if you went and looked, Steve Jobs was the product manager. Bill Gates was the product manager. The best product managers in the Valley are almost always the leaders of the company. Larry Page is a product manager. People come in and he tells them exactly what he wants to build. So I think the hard thing though is in a big company, it's not going to be the CEO of the business. In many cases, that's not the right person to do it. But you need to find these kind of people to be able to quickly and efficiently work through ideas, pilot things out, determine the value, and figure out how you make money or save money. And if you're not making money and saving money, stop it. And I think that's really a hard thing. The hardest thing in a big company, in my mind, is stopping something. That's the hardest thing. And not punishing somebody because you did it, right? In general, we all say, well, that person is terrible. That's not the case. They just learned something. Put them on the next one, they'll probably get it right. So these are the things I think we found is the #1 attribute we've had to get out of that person.
It's even harder to stop something at a university. Over there.
My name is Gideon. Bill, can you share with us, cloud has been a tremendous force in all digital innovation.
Yeah.
What is your journey in the cloud, how you've used it, and how you plan to use it for Mode 1 and Mode 2?
Yeah. So we're all in on the cloud. And by the way, that was not an easy decision in our company. I will tell you this, by and large, most people don't even know what the cloud means in GE. We're getting them there. And the Mode 2 guys, even in IT, were, let's say, skeptical on the cloud, and I'm sure you all see that. For good reason, by the way. They get paid to make sure every day the checks get delivered and the bills get paid and all that. So, but with that said, our journey has been, on the IT side, the Mode 1 stuff, we're moving all of our non-core applications onto the cloud. We publicly have said we've moved, I don't know what the number is, but it's a large number, probably in the 100 range, onto AWS. And by the way, we'll use AWS and Azure. We're happy with both of those clouds. And so we're moving a lot of, let's say, the traditional ERP loads onto there, and it is cheaper and easier for us in many cases. However, that doesn't mean we have gone the way of moving everything over, because there are certain things you have to own, and making the decision between them is the hard part. The second thing is on delivery of these additional services. Remember, I talked about asset efficiency. When we talk about how we make money in selling our applications, when we can make an asset efficient, that's important. But it turns out there's a hidden secret that you have to be really good at managing a workload and a terabyte of data. Meaning, if you look at traditional ways of doing it, managing a terabyte of data on a traditional in-house, we were seeing 10 to 30,000 a year per terabyte. And those numbers, I think, are pretty typical, what you'll see a lot of studies say. Well, you got to get it down to managing a terabyte at more like $500, which means you had better think about your cloud implementation getting down to that level. So I'll say this, a company that has a great strategy and manages a terabyte of data in a traditional data center at $12,000 is going to have their lunch eaten by somebody who builds the same application that's less efficient at 500 per terabyte, because data is going to come in mass. So now you've got to be able to create a service, and the cost per serve has to be low. Well, I'll tell you right now, industrial companies, they don't think cost to serve. But you go to Google and Facebook, they think about cost per service, which is why they've been able to go into this white box approach. So I would say we've done all of these things, but those are some of the things we've had to learn along the way. The winners will be those who have the lowest cost to serve in the market.
So let's take one last question.
Can you enlighten a little bit more on the cultural shift? I can just see you walking into a room with a CDO and going, "Hi, CIO, here's your new CDO," and just all the relationships between two technical leaders sitting in a room trying to serve a CEO.
So it's a great question, because if you get we just have our annual report. It says digital industrial. It talks about this transformation. You open it up, and there's the corporate executive staff with Jeff. And if you look at everybody, all the folks on there, there's me who's been there 5 years, and everybody else has been there 180 years, right? So the culture shift is probably the hardest thing that you have to do. And coming in, I've been in big companies. I've had my own startup. So I've lived in all those environments. The one thing I can tell you is the Silicon Valley culture coming in would be killed in GE, right? You can't be arrogant, because look, this company's 124 years old. They lived without me, and they're going to probably live a little longer without me, right? But you have to be able to, so you can't come in with an arrogance about you're not digital, you don't know what you're doing, because they're actually pretty smart. And that's true, I suspect, of every company you represent or you work with. So you have to be able, though, to talk to the culture and transition them around a few things. Speed is everything. And so if I had to say there's one cultural element, it's speed. And the second cultural element is you've got to get others in the company telling the story. If you come in and say, "You're stupid, and let me tell you the story," you're going to lose every time. But if you can tell the story to others and find the coalition of the willing to go tell the story for you, they become the folks that actually make the change. They deserve the credit. So for me, it was two things. Find the coalition of the willing, help make them successful, and go out. The second thing is get them on speed, speed, speed. And the hardest thing to change is speed. Everybody finds it very hard, because you have to get everybody to agree to something sometimes in a company, and they don't like the risk. So I'd say the speed one's the hardest. The one you'll fail on is if you don't embrace the idea that everybody else has to tell the story, not you. Those are the two things I learned, and why I've had such a great time working at GE, and why I feel privileged to have this front row seat.
So on that note, I want to leave you with Bill's last words of advice. Get them on speed. I don't think... Thank you, Vijay.